has a lot of discussions about literature and persuasion, Byron and Walter Scott, romantic poetry, but doesn't like to read literature at all, and thinks of literature as kind of an illness. Part of the story is her learning kind of a sentimental education, a poetic perspective on details of life and accidents in life. It's part of Austen's message, I think, of how we face this new global world. Radical new mobility is an attention to accidents and ironies of circumstance, delicate kind of fatalism in a world in which so much is out of our control. There's a significant power in communicating experience in the way a novel does. So, on the one hand, it means being open to accidents and change, which Lady Russell and Sir Walter, so clearly resisted in their refusal to let Anne marry Frederick. You really have to appreciate how confining Anne's world is. Lady Russell here says that it is singularity which often makes the worst part of our suffering, as it always does of our conduct. And I think that's a basic theme. She, like Sir Walter, want to stand behind their class privilege. They don't want to be singled out from their class. Their singularity amounts to exposure, and that means holding Anne hostage to that class alliance. Poetry of luck, Wordsworthian rhythm of memory and time. Persuasion makes it into like a mobile home. Wordsworth is about finding a place, but Wordsworth is kind of rooted to particular special places. But I think persuasion's about learning to take that attitude to the endless accidents of this new global world. So listen to this narration, how the term luck, what kind of valuation attaches to it. Captain Wentworth had no fortune. He had been lucky in his profession, but spending freely what had come freely, had realized nothing. Now that sounds like luck means you didn't earn it. It was by chance, so it doesn't really count. But listen how it kind of changes its evaluation as we read on. He was confident that he could soon be rich, full of life and ardor. He knew that he should soon have a ship and soon be on a station that would lead to everything he wanted. He had always been lucky. He knew he should be so still. Such confidence, powerful in its own warmth and bewitching in the wit which often expressed it. Wit, that's the thing that characterizes Austen more than anything. Must have been enough for Anne, but Lady Russell saw it very differently. His sanguine temper and fearlessness of mind operated very differently on her. She saw in it but an aggravation of the evil. It only added a dangerous character to himself. She's weirdly emotional, it seems to me. The aggravation of the evil, it just seems so excessive. It's almost like she's suppressing, his attractiveness. Wordsworth has this poem called Anecdote for Fathers, showing how the practice of lying may be taught, how parents teach their children how to lie. Kids always learn so much more from their parents than their parents realize, including their hypocrisy. Parents think they can limit what they teach them to just what they want them to know. But children learn also just from mimicking their behavior, and children are just so much more perceptive and absorbent. They're like sponges, the way they absorb and mimic their parents' behavior. So in this poem, the child is taught to lie by the parents' need for an explanation. It's sort of like in We Are Seven, where the speaker of the poem is like, give me a rational accounting. The speaker of the poem asks the child just sort of randomly, do you prefer this place or they're at a farm, and do you prefer the placed by the sea, and the child, more or less randomly, although I think it says something that the child prefers the place by the sea, maybe having to do with adventure, like in Persuasion, the wider world. But the parent badgers the child. Why? Give me a concrete reason. That's what the child can't do. But what he learns from the parent is to lie, is to come up with a reason. That explaining is like a game where you tell me what I want to hear, and I'll tell you what you want to hear. And I think that's kind of, it happens here, like that over reaction of Lady Russell. I feel like Anne kind of inherits it in the awkward way she rationalizes the breakup with Frederick. So listen to how it's narrated, because this informs the conflict between Anne and Frederick. Is Frederick's all about constancy, and Anne is she's the one that changed her mind. But this is not just about being fickle, but it's about this weird, perverse kind of rationalizing. So Lady Russell is more than Anne could combat. It's an interesting way of characterizing persuasion here. How is Anne persuaded? She's more bulldozed than persuaded, and it's a very intricate kind of suffocation that she's subjected to here. Young and gentle as she was, it might yet have been possible to withstand her father's ill will, but Lady Russell, whom she'd always loved and relied on, cannot with such steadiness of opinion and such tenderness of manner be continually advising her in vain. It's like Anne is responsible for Lady Russell's time, and she's owed something for her tenderness of manner. So this is very weird free and direct discourse here, because I don't know, I feel like it's not Anne's belief. It's more like this is the reality she has signed on to. I think persuaded here means this is the story she's going to tell. She was persuaded to speak these words. I believe it. I believe it's wrong. I admit it. This is all such just a confession of a dogmatic judgment that just seems like silencing. And I think Anne is seriously just kind of stuck behind this. But I think Anne reacts to it by learning the art of lying, or the art of like rationalizing. Like that's what Lady Russell is kind of teaching her here, because she just does this huge, she just then passes it on to Frederick by doing this huge head trip on him about how it's actually harder for me. My consolation for breaking up with you is because it's harder for me. I don't know. This is just such a load of crap. I feel like this argument she makes here, I don't think she believes it, but she's desperate. Even if she doesn't sign on to Lady Russell's lies, she kind of learns how to invent a lie for herself. And I think Frederick, I think this says it like it is. He doesn't buy it. And so he left the country and went to war and made a handsome fortune. I love that phrase, the way it combines attractiveness, good luck, and money. She's decoding kind of capitalist culture, the way in which the market is infiltrating the marriage market. So there's a pretty stark like class division encoded in their breakup. The way in which these historical forces they play out through their breakup. And this book has a lot to do with memory. It's like the Wordsworthian poetics of memory. It's just as a way of not getting locked into other people's stories, confined and voiceless like Anne is at the beginning, where she just serves to be others' convenience. Confessing her, marching orders about what she's going to believe was a wrong thing. So Anne is trying to work through these really intricate questions of relationships and sort of social contracts, but totally in isolation in her head. There's no actual communication, but she's working through these very complex questions. So this paragraph's interesting how it switches from free and direct discourse of Anne's thoughts about Lady Russell, but then it switches to free direct discourse of Anne's thoughts about Frederick during the time after Anne changes her mind, goes back on their engagement. So referring to Anne and Lady Russell, they knew not each other's opinion, either in its constancy or its change, on the one leading point of Anne's conduct, for the subject was never alluded to, never spoken. But Anne, at 7 and 20, thought very differently from what she had been made to think. That's pretty pregnant. Made to think, how she was made to think. She did not blame Lady Russell. She did not blame herself for having been guided by her. But she felt that were any young person in similar circumstances to apply to her for counsel, they would never receive any such certain immediate wretchedness, such uncertain future good. She was persuaded that under every disadvantage of disapprobation at home and every anxiety attending his profession, all their probable fears, delays, and disappointments, she should have been a happier woman in maintaining the engagement than she'd been in the sacrifice of it. Anne has evaluated her life. She's just saw like, yeah, I know it was kind of chancy, but it would have been a lot better than what I've done. Is just hang around with you guys. But she can't even say that. Like, it's just a conversation she's having with herself in her head. So it's a complicated bit of remembering, getting channeled here in the narration. She's telling herself that she would have been happy no matter what happened with Frederick. She would have been happy to accept all the uncertainty. But then she's also saying, but I know he was successful. All his sanguine expectations, all his confidence had been justified. His genius and ardor had seemed to foresee and to command his prosperous path. He had, very soon after their engagement ceased, got employ. All he told her would follow had taken place. He had distinguished himself and early gained the other step in rank, and must now, by successive captures, have made a handsome fortune. She had only navy lists and newspapers for her authority, but she could not doubt his being rich, and in favor of his constancy, she had no reason to believe him married. So she's been following his career and is still counting on his constancy. How eloquent could Anne Elliot have been? Austen is sort of commenting on the romance novel you're not reading, which did play out in Anne Elliot's head as well. Which was just as intricate, but a story of fulfilled love that you don't get to read. That's precisely an eloquence you're not going to get to hear. But instead, this is a very stark statement she makes. She'd been forced into prudence in her youth. She learned romance as she grew older, the natural sequel of an unnatural beginning. It makes me think of Frankenstein. She's saying unnatural. What's the unnatural beginning? I think she's referring to this weird kind of social engineering that's being afflicted. The head trip it does on you and the way it plays out. Romance is just a way of salvaging the wreck, salvaging the waste. That idea of the second love is what you can salvage from the ruins of the first. Salvaging of unnatural beginnings. That's just what romance is. Trying to bring love to the waste, eroticize the waste, and forge new social identities, social bonds. Anne's depression is apparent in the indifference she develops, even to Frederick himself. It's like she's so gutted by the failure of that relationship and the loss of prospects beyond it, that she just becomes entirely numb, and found herself by this time growing so much more hardened to being in Captain Wentworth's company than she had at first imagined she could ever be, that the sitting down at the same table with him now and the interchange of common civilities attending to it they never got beyond was a mere nothing. So that's powerfully worded. It sounds as if she's saying, "Oh, I've gotten over the hurt," but this mere nothing. There's something violent in this numbing, complete indifference to the most important thing that ever happened to her. So, how does Anne get over her depression? Well, I think on the one hand, it has to do with hitting rock bottom, sort of accepting her hopes are thoroughly wrecked so that she can move on and build something new from the rubble, going through transformative stage of thorough acceptance of disappointment, so that she can grow. But it also has to do with, and I think this is concomitant with the sort of wisdom of the second love or learning from disappointment, is that she learns to read. She learns the power of reading, seeing things from her own perspective, telling her own story. She cultivates a voice and perspective. And as usual in Austen, that's worked out through the narrative, how Anne's new capacities for rewriting, reperceiving her situation. But first, this stage of hitting rock bottom can't be overstated. And I mean, this passage here in chapter 7 is really illuminating. So, Mary, after Frederick returns, Mary is off with him for a walk and reports back to Anne. "Captain Wentworth is not very gallant by you, Anne, though he's so attentive to me. Henrietta asked him what he thought of you when they went away, and he said you were so altered that he should not have known you again." Mary had no feelings to make her respect her sisters in a common way, so she had no common sense of concern, but she was perfectly unsuspicious of being inflicting any peculiar wound. This is an odd formulation again, this conjunction, but sounds as if it's qualifying the first statement, like it's excusing Mary a little bit. She's unaware of causing any peculiar wound to Anne. But I think you can also read it as saying just simply she has no concern for Anne in a common way. In general, she has no concern for Anne. So this but is a little bit misleading. So, and therefore she was perfectly unsuspicious of inflicting any peculiar wounds because she didn't give a shit in general. So that's revealing of, again, her family's complete lack of concern for her. And Anne internalizes this, altered beyond his knowledge, and fully submitted in silent, deep mortification. Remember that key term, a key stage of love, not just disappointment, but actual mortification. It's like part of you has to die in order to be transfigured. I think this represents a kind of hitting rock bottom. As she continues, "So altered that she should not have known her again." These were words which could not but dwell with her, yet she soon began to rejoice that she had heard them. They were of sobering tendency, they allayed agitation, they composed and consequently made her happier. This is pretty interesting. I think psychologically realistic if you've ever been in that kind of situation, or it's like it's easier to just totally give up hope. And that's sort of what I had in mind about like hitting rock bottom. There is a consolation in the resolution, even if it's a totally negative resolution. As far as even if it's a complete disappointment, there's a consolation in the completeness and the clarity of completeness. So that's the consolation Anne gets from hitting rock bottom. But we also can see here, this is so subtly narrated, I think we can also see here the seed of what will be the other side of her recovery, which is learning to read, learning the power, being emancipated by the power of her ability to read what's going on around her. Notice how this narration, this free and direct discourse is working. This is an objective statement. These were words which could not but dwell with her. So that's not necessarily thoughts of Anne's, it could just be the narrator reporting. Yet soon she began to rejoice that she had heard them. This, it's again reporting diegesis on Anne's state. But here I think we're moving into quotation of Anne's thoughts. This is elaborating why she's rejoicing. This is, she began to rejoice that she had heard them, and this is explaining what she learned. This is Anne's articulation of the lesson that she learned. She's rejoicing because of the self-knowledge. I'm happy that I heard them. It's not just that hearing them directly makes her happy, it's the knowledge that she had heard them. So this rejoicing at this self-consciousness, it's different from the direct effect of the words. The direct effect of the words was sobering. They were of sobering tendency. They allayed agitation, but this they composed and consequently must make her happier. What does that mean? They composed her. I think they allow her that self-recollection, self-possession, self-determination, or self-composition. Again, exactly. Writing a freedom of, or an autonomy of self-composition. That's what is getting quoted here precisely, is Anne's self-composition. She is reflecting upon herself as composed. She's composing herself in this new story about herself, consequently must make her happier. This is the source of her rejoicing, this new perspective that she has on herself. That's getting quoted here by the narrator. So again, she's flipped the script in a certain way. These words that were mortifying, now I see they're composing me. And that seeing myself that way is a self-composition. That might sound like Austen here is channeling Frederick. I think because it's all about him, but really she's channeling Anne's thoughts about him. He had thought her wretchedly altered, and in the first moment of appeal, had spoken as he felt. So I think that's clearly from Anne's perspective. This word wretched is, as we've seen, a lot in Frankenstein, it's a term of self-debasement that Anne is referring to herself as wretched, that mortification. All he said was that she's altered, that he didn't recognize her. She is qualifying that as wasted. So this is all Anne. This is Anne's perspective on what's going on inside Frederick's head. So this is the complexity of Austen's narration, and it's crucial because this complexity is ultimately what liberates Anne. It's the complexity of the form of self-composition. That's to say the complexity of the form of a Jane Austen. In this case, it's about Anne liberating herself from the very blunt, confining terms of her family's, not combating those terms, not going head to head, but to offer a composition of much finer grain and compose a self out of this more fine-grained perception, and through the novel communicate a world, a reality, desires, and to share and constitute a point of view on reality. Make that more fine-grained reality real. Make that form of self-consciousness, of self-composition, circulate in the world as an available medium of selfhood for Austen's readers.